Hey everybody, so today I thought we would color this cute Some Odd Girls stamp called Wishes, and she is a clear stamp, so you'll want to clean her before you stamp her on your color page to make sure she's stamping clear. And there is a tutorial on the store blog on why you need to do that and how to do that. So I've already stamped my image on a piece of Canson 140-pound watercolor paper with Ranger Archival jet black ink. So let's get started. Alright, so I'm going to start this time by outlining my image and doing the sky area with some tumbled glass distress ink. So I'm going to use my medium water brush for that, and I've already made sure it's wet enough, and I've tested it on my hand, so it is damp when I wipe it on my hand, but it's not leaving a mark. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of my tumbled glass, and when you do the outline, you can always have your brush be a little bit wetter than it would be if you were just painting, because you're going to be spreading it out a little bit more. But you're just going to lay down a little bit of ink along the edge, however far you want it to go. Let's go around her wing. And then my ink's running out, so I'm going to go ahead and wipe my excess ink off. And then I'm just going to take the water in my brush and wipe the ink away from my image out here into the background. I'm just smoothing that line, and I'm bringing it out here into onto my paper as far as it'll go until it just turns white. This is why it helps to also have it a little bit wetter brush when you're doing the outline, because it will spread out here a lot easier. So let's continue along around the outside. I'll get in here in between her wings. And then wipe my brush off, and then just use the water I have on my brush to pull that ink away from my image out here into the background. And we're going to do that all the way around. Pull that right away, and it gives it a nice blue shadow around the outside of my girl. Let's go down here and do down along this side. I'm going to turn it around so that I can pull away from me. And I think my sky, I'm going to have it go down here along her knee, get up here under her hair, and we'll just bring that out here into my circle. And if it feels like your brush is starting to drag, go ahead and give it a squeeze and re-wet it. And we'll go around her hair. Just smooth that out. We better get up here. I'll add just a little bit more right here along the top of her head. Okay, and then you're going to go, so you go all the way around, and then you decide if that was as dark as you wanted it, you let it dry, and then if you wanted to add some more shadows, you'd go back after it's dried and add some more. But we're going to go down here and work on the ground, and for that I'm going to use antique linen, so she'll have something to sit on. So let me grab my ink palette here. Okay, and so you're going to decide where you want the ground to be, and I'm going to say it's going to go, I want her hand to be, even though I put a little bit of blue here, I'm going to now cover that up with a little bit of my antique linen and make it look like her hand is resting on the ground just a little bit. So I'm just going to take my brush, add a little bit here along the side, just like we did with the blue, work my way down a little bit, then wipe my excess off, and use just the water in my brush to flick it away from my image out here into the background and make it disappear until it's just the paper. And we're going to do that all the way around, so let's go down here and add some more down here at the bottom of her dress. And then wipe that away. Makes it look like she's not sitting in thin air there. She's got a little bit of something to sit on. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and go do this other side. And wipe that away. And again, if your brush feels like it's dragging, give it a little squeeze to re-wet it. Mine was feeling a little dry there. Didn't feel like it was wiping the ink around at all. But just like that, we've got her something to sit on. So, whoops, got a little bit of blue there mixed in, so let me wipe that out a little bit more. So there we've got her completely outlined, and let's go color her face. Okay, so for her face, I'm going to start by giving it a light coat of Tattered Rose. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that on my brush, and I always want to lay down where I want it to be darkest first. So I'm going to lay down my ink right along her hairline. And then I'm going to use, and I didn't have very much on my brush, so it's now turned almost a light pink color, but I'm just going to use what I laid down to drag down further onto her face. And it's okay that it's pretty white down here at the bottom, because we're going to go back and add another coat after that dries. So I like to skip around, so while that's drying, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to work on her arm. So I want the light to be kind of shining on her wings back here, so I'm going to lay down my shadow, my brush where I want it to be darkest here in the front. And then I'm just going to use that little bit of ink that I laid down to wipe over here onto the rest of her arm and onto her back. And then we'll grab a little bit more. And let's do this knee she's got poking out of her dress. Give that a little bit of a pink. Then I think I'll add some over here to this arm. And we'll use that to color in her back here a little bit more to get that started. And her wings kind of go over the top of her body right here, but that's okay. I'm going to paint that pink underneath so that it'll still have the illusion when I paint the yellow that it's going to be a little bit darker there where we painted her skin. Okay, so let's go up here and add another layer to our face since it's dry. So again, I lay down where I want it to be darkest, so I'm going to go ahead and put that right down underneath of her hairline. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off because I still had quite a bit on there. And I'm going to use that I put on her, on my line, to rub down here onto the bottom of her face. And we'll get her ear and try to drag some down here into her chin and her neck. And if you start getting a buildup on your brush, go ahead and wipe that excess off and then go back and continue pulling it down into the bottom of her skin here. I'm constantly wiping my brush off or picking up more ink. Alright, she looks pretty good for a first coat on her face, so I'm going to go down here and add another bit to her arm. So I'm going to grab a little bit, and I want it to, remember, be darkest here in the front, so I'm going to lay down my ink on that side of her body. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off. And then I'm going to use just my water in my brush to pull that ink out into the rest of her skin area. And I think I'll add a little bit more to her knee. Maybe just a little bit down here. Like that. And maybe a little bit more to this arm over here. Make that one just a little bit darker. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I think I'll go up here and add just another coat to her face. And I'm going to make it a little bit darker on this side, and I'm going to darken up down here on her cheek just a little bit. Add a little bit of ink to that, and then pull that out here. And I think I better add a little bit more to her ear, because I don't get very much over there into this last few times. And maybe along her jaw right here. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to let that dry for a second, and then we're going to come in and add some shadows. Okay, so I've given that just a second to dry, and so since I'm always adding my Tattered Rose and my tea dye as shadows on my images, I went ahead and just mixed that in one of the empty wells of my ink palette I have here. So I always have it mixed up. I don't have to remix it every time. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that. This is Tattered Rose and tea dye mixed together onto my brush, and we're going to add that where we want it to be darkest. So I'm going to go down here and add a little bit of shadow to her arm. And we're going to use that little bit I laid down to bring out here onto her arm. And it is quite a bit darker, so you want to be careful. I'm just dabbing it along. And then I think I'll add a little bit along the back of her arm right here, and maybe along the bottom of her dress where her dress touches her skin, and then just use the water in my brush to lightly tap the edges and smooth that line just a little bit. Let's get that little indentation in her back and her shoulder blade. Maybe a little bit right here in the crease of her arm. You can also switch to your detail brush, and it has a smaller tip if you're having a hard time. So let's go over here and get her leg. A little bit up here next to her dress where it's touching her knee, and then just use water to pat that line and bring it out just a little bit. Then for her face, again, I'm going to lay down where I want it to be the darkest. So I'm going to do right here underneath of her hair. And then wipe my brush off and come up here and smooth that line down just a little bit with just the water. And I think I'll do the inside of her ear. Give that just a little bit. And maybe right along her jawline here just a tad. So it looks like it's got a little bit of a shadow and it rolls. Her face is rounded. So like that. And then I also want to give her a little bit of a definition of a nose. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of ink on the end of my brush, and she's got this little swoop right here for the bottom of her nose, but I'm going to give it just a little bit of a line like this so that it looks like she's got a little bit of an indentation. Then I'm going to very lightly touch the edges of that and spread it out just a little bit towards her eye over here. Soften that line just a little bit, but that makes her look like she has a nose there instead of nothing. So we're going to let that dry for just a second, and then we'll add some cheek color. Alright, so for a cheek color, I'm going to mix a little bit of Tattered Rose and Aged Mahogany. So I've just dipped my brush into the end of my Tattered Rose, and I've put it on this piece of acetate. And this piece of acetate I've just taped to a piece of white paper so I can see the ink on the sheet. And then I'm going to go ahead and wipe that excess ink off my brush, and I'm going to grab just a tiny bit of the Aged Mahogany on the end of my brush. So I've got just a little bit on there. And I'm going to wipe that into my Tattered Rose and mix it up. And that's looking pretty pink. So I'm going to grab a little bit more of my Tattered Rose on my brush and swirl it in there and lighten it up just a little bit. And you'll know just by looking at it, or you would maybe have a piece of scratch paper you could try it on to see how dark it is. So I'm going to use this mixed paint to add some color to her cheek. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that color on there, and I'm going to lay it down here on the edge. Bring it out just a little bit. Then I'm going to wipe my brush off, and I'm going to use just water to pull it out just a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing for this side. I'm going to add a little bit here underneath of her eye, and then wipe that excess ink off my brush and use just the water to pull it out just a little bit and soften it. Okay, and I'm going to let that dry, but while that's drying, we're going to go up here and work on her hair. And so for her hair, I started with a base layer of tea dye. So let me grab that. Okay, so and if your brush is feeling dry, go ahead and give it a little squeeze to wet it. So we're going to grab a little bit of tea dye on my brush here. And you always want to remember, lay it down where you want it to be darkest, even though we've moved to a new area. And so I'm going to say that this little part she has in her hair is going to be the darkest. So I'm going to put a little bit on there like that, and then I'm going to wipe that excess off my brush, and I'm going to use just the water in my brush to bring that ink and pull it out into the rest of her hair. Soften it just a little bit. Like that. Okay, and let's continue on down here on the underside of her hair while that's drying just a little bit. So again, I'm going to dip my brush in the tea dye, put down my little line, and then wipe any excess off I have on my brush before I start wiping that line out into the rest of her hair. Just going to pull that out and give her hair just a little bit of color at the ends. And I think maybe I'll add just a little bit over here. So I've grabbed a little bit of my tea dye on my brush and laid down my line, then wipe it off, and then I'm going to pull that up here so I can darken that little strand up, because my ink from up here didn't pull that far. Okay, and let's do the same thing with this side. So she's got this great little, where it curves over here. I'm going to put down a little bit of my tea dye there on that side, wipe that excess off my brush, and then just use that ink to pull up into this little space right here and fill that in. Okay, so I've let that dry, and I'm going to go in now and I'm going to add tea dye and gathered twigs, which I've mixed onto my little acetate sheet. So I have it all mixed right here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of that. And I want to add some shadows. Again, you know, you want to put down your pen where you want it to be darkest. So I want her hair to be darkest up here in the root of her hair, where it looks like she has it parted right there. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit on there. And I'm just going to use my water to pull that out away from that root, or from her part there just a little bit. Okay, we're going to do the same thing over here where her hair is coming away from her face. So I'm going to add a little bit of my mixed paint right here along her hair. And then we're going to wipe my brush off and then just use the water to pull that line out here into her hair. And it just gives it a nice little shadow there right next to her face, but keeps it light out here at the end. So let's add also a little bit right here where she's got it rolling over her head. And we'll pull that a little bit up here. Maybe when you just have a little bit on your brush, I kind of use it to wipe around out here in the middle and down here on this side right here. Just gives it a little bit more color on there. And I think I'm going to add a little bit more over here, and I'm going to brush it this way this time. Like that. And maybe we should add a little bit here underneath where her hair comes around underneath of her ear right here in the back. So add a little bit on there and pull that up. Uh-oh, and I painted her ear just a little bit, so let's wipe that off. And pull that over here. Like that. There, that looks pretty good. And so while we've been working on her hair, her cheeks have dried. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more of my cheek color, my mixed tattered rose and my aged mahogany onto her cheek. I'm going to pinken them up just a little bit. And that's totally up to you. If you have enough down the first time and don't feel it needs any more, then don't put any more on there. Mine were looking a little bit dry, so I'm going to add a little bit on there for that. And let's put a little dab right here on her lips. Oh, looks like I'm going to have to get a little bit more paint for that. Oh, and we better do her eyebrow up here too, so I'm going to go ahead and grab some of my mixed hair color for that and just color her eyebrow. Okay, so I've let her cheeks dry there a little bit, but I think I'm going to even up her skin tone a little bit by taking a little bit of my tattered rose again and going down the side of her face just a little bit and wiping that out here onto her face because it was looking a little bit blotchy. And that will help even it up, so it doesn't have all those lines all over it. So that looks pretty good. And I'm also going to go in and add a little bit of cheek color here, or lip color right after this is dried a little bit. But while that's drying, let's go do, give her eyes some color. And for that, I'm going to use Broken China. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my Broken China on my brush, and I'm just going to color her eye in. Okay, and I'm going to grab a little bit more so I have it darker. It's not all diluted with water. And add some to this side. Okay, and we're going to let that dry a second. But while that's drying, I'm going to get a little bit of the aged mahogany on my brush and dab her little lip right here. Oops, I got a little too wet. Let me brush that off just a little bit. I didn't let her lip dry enough, so it's got a little bit of water on there, so I better let that dry just a little bit more and then come back and add a little bit more if it needs pinked up. Okay, so I've let that dry for a minute, and I'm going to go ahead and grab me a little bit more of my Broken China on my brush. I want to darken that up just a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and add another coat. Darken up her little eyeballs a little bit more. Okay, so we'll let that dry, but while that's drying, let's go down here and add some color to, well, let's start her dress. So her dress is tumbled glass, so I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of that on my brush, and let's do right up here on the back of her dress, right up there, and then let's start right here on the front of her dress. And then it kind of swoops around her back right here, so I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit on that. Same for this one. And we're just adding a light first coat so that we can, we'll come back and add another layer here in just a second after that dries. Okay, she's got a little bit of dress over her knee. And then we want to add a light coat to the whole back of this dress. But again, you want it to be, lay down your brush where you want it to be darkest, because that's where the ink's going to start the most. So I'm going to go right next to this little belt along the top there and along her hand. And then I'm just going to use that ink to brush down here into the rest of her dress. So we're going to pull that all the way down to the bottom. And if it doesn't reach clear down here, it doesn't feel like there's any ink down here at the bottom, that's okay, because we're going to go back and we can add another coat after this coat is dried and pull a little bit more and darken it up down here at the bottom. But that looks pretty good for our first coat. Alright, so we're going to let that dry. So while that's drying, let's go up here and do her eyes some more. And for her eyes, I don't know why, but they didn't give her any pupils. And I just hate that look, so I'm going to give her some. So I've got my Ranger Black Soot Distress Marker, and I'm just going to draw some in. So we're just going to go like so. And draw some on so she has an eyeball. I just don't like the look of there just being nothing there. She looks like a zombie. I can't do it. So I'm going to draw some in there, and they may not be perfect, and mine are not perfect, but it looks better to me than it did with just the just it blue. And then after that, I'm all done coloring her, I'll put a little white dot on her eye to give her a little bit of a sparkle in there. So now we've got that all finished, so let's go down here and work on her dress some more. So I'm going to go ahead and give her dress a second coat. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my tumbled glass on my brush. And I'm just going to work my way back around on all those parts that I already did. And add another layer of color. Okay, and for the back of her dress, we'll go right along the top here. And I'm just going to work that ink down towards the bottom of her skirt, making it a nice light blue down here at the bottom. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's let that dry for a second, and then we'll add our mixed paint to add some shadows. Okay, so for our shadows on her dress, I went ahead and mixed me a little bit of my tumbled glass and just a tiny dab of peacock feathers onto my acetate sheet. And I've also switched to my detail brush so I can get some of these little lines with just the very tip of my pen here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab me a little bit of my mixed paint on there. And I still want to add a little bit to some of these spots up here. Maybe at the top of her dress. A little bit down there on her knee. Like that. Add just a little bit of dark shadows there a little bit. And then for her skirt, I want to do some of these great little lines she's got. So I'm going to run my brush right down some of these little lines on her dress. Like that. And then I'm going to take just my water in my brush and very lightly tap the edges of that line. and pull it away just a little bit so that it comes out here onto her dress and lightens up. But it's still dark in the right next to the line. Like that looks pretty good. Let's go work. And if you might want to, do a couple on that side and then come over, skip one, so in case it got a little bit wet, you won't be messing with one right next to each other and getting more saturated there. Let's do a little bit over here. And she's got this great one that comes down in here. Okay, and let's get this one. I'm going to do that with all of the lines on her dress, just to give them a little bit of a shadow. I want her dress to still be pretty light, but we want to be able to see a few of those little creases and bumps. Give it a little bit of character. And get this one up here. I didn't get the first time because that one right next to it was pretty wet. And maybe a little bit underneath of her hand, just a little bit. Alright, I'm liking how that looks. Maybe get a little bit in some of these little bumps here at the bottom of her dress. Like a little blue on her hand there, so let's wipe that off. Maybe just a dab here at the end of her dress. Darken that up just a little bit. When I put my tumbled glass on, it didn't get all the way to the bottom there. That'll give it a nice little shadow. So I'm liking how that looks, how all the creases have the dark in there, and then there's a little bit of light on this part. So I'm going to go ahead and let that dry, and if I need to, I'll come back and add some more colors, but I'm thinking that looks pretty good because her dress is pretty light from the first time I colored it. So let's give that a second to dry and we'll do the ruffle, but let's go up here and work on her wings. And for her wings, we are going to use Squeezed Lemonade as our first coat. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my medium brush and a little bit of Squeezed Lemonade on my brush. Let's put this one brush over here. And then I'm going to go ahead and start where I want it to be darkest, and I want mine to be darkest up here at the top of her wing. So I'm going to lay down my line, and then I'm going to wipe that excess off, and I'm going to use what I laid down to come down here into the bottom of her wing. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe that excess off. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to do it again. I'm actually pulling a little bit off and wiping it on my napkin because it's pretty dark. So I'm going to pick some up on my brush and then get rid of it over here on my napkin a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good for a first coat. So let's give that all a few seconds to dry and we'll add some yellow down at the bottom of her skirt. Okay, so we've let that dry for a couple of minutes. Now I want to add a little bit of shadows, and for my shadows on my wings I'm going to use mustard seed. I'm going to grab a little bit of my mustard seed, and I just want it to be shadowed up here at the top of her wing. So I'm going to put a little bit on there, and then I'm going to come back and lightly brush that down, and that's quite a bit, so I'm going to wipe my brush off. I'm going to come back and lightly brush some more on that edge of that wing. And I got a little bit on this top part right here that I didn't want, so I'm going to go ahead and erase that by brushing some water over it, picking it back up with my brush, and then dabbing it off on my paper towel. So let's go ahead and do this top wing. So I've grabbed a little bit more mustard seed. I'm going to run that right along the top, wipe the excess off on my paper towel, and then come in with just water and lightly soften that edge. And again, when I get to the end, I'm going to wipe my brush off, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to tap right over the top of it again, just to soften it just a little bit. But I wanted her wings to have a little bit more color in there. Okay, so we're also going to use mustard seed to color her ruffle down here. So I'm going to grab a little bit on the end of my brush, and I'm just going to start up here at the top, and I'm going to work my way around her skirt. All the way, and I had quite a bit on my brush. It doesn't seem like much when you put it on there, but it was enough that I could go all the way around. Makes it a nice yellow. Your distress markers would work great for going in and adding some mustard seed right on top of some of these lines. Okay, so I'm going to grab a little bit more mustard seed, and I want to do her belt. I'm going to go up here and paint her belt. And I'm just going to go right over those dots because I'm going to paint those peacock feathers. So I think the blue will cover those up nicely. Like that. So that looks pretty good. So let's give that a couple minutes to dry, and then we'll put the dots on our belt, and then we will put our card together. Okay, so I've given that a couple of minutes to dry, and I want to go in here and I want to add some color to these little circles she has on her belt. And for that, I'm going to use peacock feathers, and I've switched to my detail brush, so it's got a smaller point at the end, because those little dots are pretty small. So I'm going to grab a little bit of peacock feathers, and I'm just going to go in and paint each one of these little circles. And I'm running out of ink there, so I'm going to wipe my brush off because it's collected a little bit of water. I'm going to come back in with some more color and dab some more on top. And you may have to do that a couple times depending on how dark you want those, but I'm going to let those dry. But now let's go up here and let's add some glitter to her eyes for eyeshadow. So this month you got a Wink of Stella yellow glitter pen in your kit. So I'm going to go ahead and take my little piece of acetate that I have here, and I'm going to take my glitter pen, and I'm just going to color some right onto my acetate, like that. And then I'm going to pick some of that yellow up to do her eyeshadow. I'm going to move that over here. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that on the end of my brush, and she has, I'm going to go ahead and go straight up from the line on her eye right here, and just brush a little bit out. And same for this side. I'm going to go pretend there's a line right here, and I'm going to brush a little bit of that out. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my excess off of my brush, and I'm going to lightly go in and just dab that edge so that it can be softened up just a little bit. But that gives her just a little bit of color on her eye, like she's got on some eye makeup. I'm also going to add some of this yellow glitter pen to her wings. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up a little bit more on my brush, and I'm just going to go in, and I know you won't be able to see it on camera, but I'll add sparkle to her wings down here. And I'm just going to lightly paint right over the top of all my color and add some shimmer. You can also take the brush and go directly on there. It's just way more intense, and I wanted it to be just a little bit of sparkle, so I just used my piece of acetate. But that gives her some eyeshadow and some glimmer to her wings. And I think she looks pretty good. Alright, so let's put our card together. And we don't have to tuck anything under anything else this time, so we can just start gluing stuff together. So I'm going to go ahead and attach my girl to her mat. Set her aside for a second. Now I got all these great pieces. Let's attach this yellow piece to the card base. And then it comes with this little doily piece, so attach that next. And then we got the little yellow piece, that goes on next. Or you could use the blue side, that's pretty. I love double-sided paper because you can use, you got twice as many options, so you can flip it over and do whatever you need to with it. So this one's set, I set it kind of crooked, so let's attach that. And then it's got two scallop pieces, and one is on top of the other one, so I'm going to go ahead and attach those together. Line up the edge here. Looks pretty good. Let's smush that down. Okay, and then this little blue piece is attached to that, so let's go ahead and glue that on there. And it has some great flowers on the back. I love this piece. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and stick this like so. And then this piece is going to go on here. So let's go ahead and attach that. Okay, and that goes kind of, you can see a little bit on this side over here of this yellow paper. That. And then we got our girl, so let's go ahead and do some pop dots on the back of her. Like this. And she is sitting right here, like, let's put her about right here. Okay, and let me get the flowers and we'll put those on. Okay, so for the flowers, we have 3 blue ones and 2 brown with prints. So for the blue ones, I'm going to go a large blue one, and then a medium brown print one, and then a small blue one, but you can put them together however you would like. And then I'm going to use a medium blue one and a small brown print. put those on here, and I'm going to put those down here in the corner. I think I'll put this medium one down here. I'll put some glue on the back, and I'm going to stick that like so. And then we'll take the 3 petal one, or the 3 flower one, and put that right next to it. Right here, that looks pretty good. And that'll give it a second to dry while we attach our sentiment. And so with our sentiment, I've already stamped my sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink on my piece, so I wouldn't have to do it on camera. And so I'm going to put some tape on the back. And I'm going to put that, I think I'll put a little pop dot on the back of that too, so I don't have to worry about this other end flinging up. And I'm just going to put that right here, like that. Okay, and then in your kit you also got some of these little Bella Bling pearls, and I love these because they're already self-adhesive. You just have to pop them off. They have a little pop dot on the back, and stick them on, and ta-da, you have instant embellishment. Like that. Okay, and that is our January watercoloring card this month. So if you're watching this later on after it posts and it's no longer a private link, you can go to the store and in the search bar put wishes in there and see if the kit's still available. If not, check out this month's kit that is currently available, and there's a private video for that you can watch. So thanks for joining me. Have a great day.